Are you surprised about the lack of reaction we're seeing in the markets when we see the BOJ pushing that inflation target even further out into the future and, to some extent, beyond Governor Kuroda's tenure?
Right. Well, I don't think market was surprised that. Well, I think by now market have a perfect understanding that BOJ has a bias toward higher inflation, and the BOJ knows it. Should know it themselves. Market knows it very well. So it's just a matter of time that the Bank of Japan will keep delaying its expectation for the inflation target to be reached.
So was that something that you were expecting to see? I mean, how much credibility does the Bank of Japan's policy have? I've got a chart here, not sure if you can see it, Takuji Okubo, but it basically points out the change in policy that we've seen from the BOJ, how they're attempting now to keep, of course, their JGB, their 10-year JGB, the yield, around 0%. How do you rate their success with this policy?
Right. So in terms of Bank of Japan's credibility, credibility is weak, I would say at best, and it's actually close to, BOJ is close to exhausting all the credibility they have built up over the last few decades. Kuroda pretty much destroyed the credibility of Bank of Japan. I mean, look at when you think about the inflation, they delayed it this time today. But then when you think about what happened in the past, let's say 1-2 months, it has been actually positive. You know, commodity price is up, yen is down. So Bank of Japan should be actually revising up its inflation target, but instead it did down. So if despite actually positive improvement in the economy, so it really shows that the Bank of Japan has been obviously biased in its inflation outlook.
Takuji, hold that thought. Jeremy Stress, let's bring you into the conversation. The Bank of Japan should be raising its inflation target, Takuji says, rather than lowering it. I'm just looking at the yen strength in your notes, Jeremy. Welcome to the show, by the way. Reducing our net long positions, or the market is reducing its net long positions in yen, leaving them the lowest in 2 months. Are they understating inflation target? And just talk us through the market positioning at the moment.
Well, I think it's true that we have seen, obviously, markets maintaining long positions in the yen for some time, and that's really due to the broader market uncertainty. I would agree with your previous commentator that the credibility of the Bank of Japan has certainly been compromised of late, and I think there is no great surprise that the Bank of Japan has pushed out the timing of the meeting of the inflation profile. It's rather like the trying to find the crock of gold at the end of the rainbow. It just never seems to be met, and I think that's going to be the scenario that's going to remain in play over the tenure of Mr. Kuroda and beyond. So I think it's still the case that that elusive inflation target will still be some way into the middle distance, well out into 2019.
Jeremy, we expect more details on the BOJ's bond buying program for November later today. What are you expecting from those numbers, and what does that tell us in terms of future policy?
Well, I think that's going to be fascinating in terms of the program, in terms of how that relates to the yield curve control target, because clearly we're still in the very early stages of that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if we can gain any inference from the details to try and see if they are going to try and adapt the purchasing pattern to try and allow that 10-year rate to oscillate around that 0% target. That, of course, is still relatively fresh and relatively new, and markets are still attempting to interpret how that will work over time.
Takuji, it was interesting to note that the BOJ, having carried out this review of its policy and how it's working, it was surprised at how businesses and individuals in Japan had not reacted in the way they'd expected to the stimulus that the BOJ has put into the markets. How do we break then this deflationary mindset that seems to grip the Japanese, whether that, even in the face of all of the stimulus that has been thrown at the markets, they still hark back to the past and to expectations that deflation will continue?
Well, I think we should never underestimate the intelligence of the crowd. There has been a lot of empirical papers talking that in general, actually the people knows best. Market actually can judge, forecast the best. So I think the fact that the Japanese population in general remain pessimistic actually shows how little credibility Japanese policymakers have had this far. So I think Abenomics had a good start for a year in 2013, but then since 2014, when they made a mistake of raising consumption tax rate, I think their credibility has been just going down, and the people are actually right. They are correct in predicting deflation in future.
Takuchi, I've got the demographics in terms of cross-borders, who's allowing immigrations. Japan stands at 72,000. It's lagging its G7 peers really quite considerably, but our story today says that Japan is quietly opening the door to foreign workers. Is this part of the answer for the Bank of Japan, opening the doors to immigration and Abenomics?
Well, I agree with the conclusion. I think that the expectation that the Japanese population will keep shrinking, working population will keep shrinking, that idea is a fairly strong depressant to their future outlook. And so it is true that Japan should do something about immigration. Whether the current government is actually doing it, I actually don't think so. They are talking about it, but admitting maybe a couple hundred more, maybe a couple thousand more immigrants, but that doesn't really help.